Step out of the car. Now! The voice cracked through the morning air like a whip. Sergeant Ryan McAllister's tone wasn't a request. It was a threat sharpened by caffeine and resentment. Behind him, the red and blue lights flickered against the black Tesla Model S, gliding to a stop on Highway 99 North. The morning sun hit the polished hood, throwing back flashes that danced across Elijah Harper's windshield. He looked into the rearview mirror. No violation, no reason. And knew instantly this wasn't about traffic, it was about him, McAllister's partner, Officer Lena Voss. Slammed her door hard enough to make the asphalt tremble. Her hand gripped the baton like it was a test of strength. She circled the car, tapping on the rear glass. Trunk open. Sir, now. Her voice carried that false courtesy that comes right before cruelty. Elijah, calm but alert, kept both hands visible on the steering wheel. Officer, he said evenly, is there a legal reason for this stop? The reply was the sound of the baton hitting the car again. McAllister leaned in through the driver's window. His breath smelled of stale whiskey and burnt coffee. Left tail lights blinking. He said, "That's enough reason," before diving deeper into this story. Where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. If stories of justice and truth matter to you, hit subscribe and give this video a like. It helps more people see what sunlight reveals when the badge turns dark. Elijah Harper was a man who understood both law and silence. At 38, he had spent half his life in courtrooms dissecting lies and teaching juries the difference between evidence and assumption. But nothing in his federal training prepared him for the moment a knee pressed against his neck under the bright Seattle sun. McAllister's radio crackled. A short Zello ping. Harp, Tesla, 750 bet, confirm. Elijah heard it faintly through the open door, just enough to register the words, a bet. His stop was worth $750 to someone. That was all it took to turn a federal officer into a prize. He hit record on his phone, sliding it into his vest pocket. Voss ordered him out again. Louder this time, voice shaking with something that sounded like adrenaline or fear. Out of the car! Hands where I can see them! She yanked the door open before he could comply. The seatbelt caught across his chest as she pulled him halfway out. McAllister moved in from behind, shouting about resisting arrest. Elijah never resisted. He didn't even raise his voice, but they needed resistance to justify the show. The ground was still cool from the night, but the metal of Voss's knee burned against his neck as she pinned him down. The sound of gravel scraped his cheek. 42 seconds. That's how long it lasted. 42 seconds of sunlight, silence, and the humiliation of breathing through grit and rage while the officers laughed over the open channel. When they hauled him up, blood streaked down the side of his face from a scrape at the temple. McAllister didn't meet his eyes. Voss looked away completely, as if afraid of what she'd done. The cuffs clicked tight, too tight. Elijah felt the sting travel up his arms. "What's the charge?" he asked, voice steady. McAllister smirked. "We'll think of something." The ride to Precinct 7 took 11 minutes. The patrol car's back seat reeked of old sweat and disinfectant through the metal grate. Elijah could see the morning city roll by. Clean sidewalks, joggers, sunlight flashing through glass towers. The same Seattle that printed posters about reform, equality, and accountability. He'd helped draft some of those reforms himself. Now he was the test subject for how much they really meant. Inside the precinct, the hallways smelled of burnt coffee and copier toner. The fluorescent lights hummed faintly. The camera above the booking desk blinked red for a second, then went dark. Systems down again. Someone muttered. McAllister wrote something on a clipboard and handed it off without looking. "Hold him in 4B, he said. "Resisting and assaulting an officer." The clerk didn't question it. Nobody did. The holding cell was small, concrete painted beige. with a metal bench bolted to the wall. A single window slit let in a blade of sunlight that cut across Elijah's face. He counted his breaths, tried to steady his pulse. His watch was gone. His tie had been cut when they searched him. His throat hurt when he swallowed. Somewhere down the hall, an officer laughed, a low, cruel laugh that made the silence heavier. He thought about his wife, Selena. She used to drive this same stretch of Highway 99 before she disappeared 2 years ago. Her case was still open, but everyone stopped talking about it after a month. The file had gone quiet, like a door sealed shut. He used to imagine she was somewhere safe, but every time he saw a police badge now, that hope cracked a little more. Outside, the sun climbed higher. On another morning, he would have been preparing arguments for court, reviewing files, maybe calling Naomi Park about her maternity leave plans. Today, his only file was the charge sheet on a desk outside the cell, a sheet that turned a prosecutor into a criminal. McAllister stood on the other side of the glass, arms crossed, watching him. "You think you're better than us, huh?" he said. "We all bleed the same." Elijah met his gaze and said quietly, "Some of us bleed for truth." It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. But McAllister flinched anyway, as if the words carried weight heavier than a weapon. Minutes later, Voss appeared with a clipboard. Her hands shook slightly as she wrote. McAllister barked, "Make it stick! Lena, we're not losing this one." She nodded but didn't look up when she turned to leave. The sleeve of her uniform brushed against the bars, leaving a faint streak of chalky dust on the steel. Elijah noticed small tremors in her hand. Maybe guilt. Maybe fear of something bigger than either of them. Then came the quiet, the kind that fills every corner of a man's thoughts when he realizes justice has left the room. Elijah leaned back against the wall and let his mind replay the 42 seconds. The pressure, the sunlight, the sound of his own breath fighting for space. He wasn't angry yet. He was calculating. Every injustice leaves a pattern, and he had spent his life learning how to read them, somewhere above him. The building's air vent rattled. He listened to it like a metronome, steady and mechanical. In another office, someone would type a report, falsify a log, maybe delete a camera file. It was routine. That was what made it dangerous. The casual way corruption disguised itself as paperwork. At 9:10 a.m., Naomi Park arrived at the precinct's front desk. Her badge caught the morning light as she introduced herself. Assistant District Attorney, King County, pregnant, steady, and unafraid. She asked for access to her client, the desk sergeant, chewing gum. Shook his head. "He's being processed. Come back later. In the holding cell." Elijah's eyes caught the sunlight again, warmer now, stretching across the wall like a promise. He didn't know that. Down in the basement, a woman in a yellow jacket was wheeling a mop bucket past a steel trash bin labeled "Confidential Burn." Her name was Sarah Bennett, and in less than an hour, she would find the first clue that would burn Precinct 7 to the ground. But for now, the man who once stood for justice sat in silence, wrists raw, eyes open, and a faint smile breaking through the pain. The system had just made its worst mistake. It arrested the man who knew exactly how to dismantle it. The morning had sharpened into full daylight when Naomi Park arrived at Precinct 7. Her coat brushed against her belly as she moved, 7 months pregnant and still refusing to slow down. She flashed her badge and spoke clearly. "I'm here to see Elijah Harper." The officer at the desk looked up from his cup of coffee. Unbothered. "Not possible." "Ma'am, he's still under questioning." Naomi's tone didn't waver. "He's not a suspect. He's a federal prosecutor. I want him released now." The officer shrugged, tapping the keyboard without typing. "Come back after lunch. Maybe then." She stared at him for 3 long seconds, then turned away. She'd seen this wall before, the one built out of procedure and arrogance, tall enough to hide misconduct. She called upstairs, but no one answered, down in the basement. Sarah Sonny Bennett pushed a yellow mop bucket through the hall. Her fake badge read, Maintenance Assistant. The air was thick with the scent of bleach and hot metal. She had been coming here every Tuesday and Thursday for 3 weeks under a contract cleaning crew. No one noticed her. That was the point. Her camera, small enough to hide inside a tissue box, hung around her neck like an ID tag. Sonny paused near the steel bin marked Confidential Burn. It was almost full. Crumpled papers, envelopes, even a few film canisters. She glanced around. No one was watching. In one smooth motion, she opened the lid, slipped on gloves, and began sorting. Her heart thudded as she found a stack of Polaroids clipped together, officers laughing beside stacks of cash, beer cans on a poker table. Beneath it, an invoice, Axon Security Solutions, $5,000 monthly, signed by Sergeant Ryan McAllister. Sonny frowned. Axon was a private vendor for precinct surveillance equipment. Why was cash flowing to a personal account? She slid the papers into a trash bag and continued. Then came the jackpot. A torn notebook page with the heading Blue Bet. She froze. That name had appeared before. Whispered in police bars. Rumored to be some underground game where officers gambled on who they stopped, who they humiliated, who they could make kneel. Her hands trembled slightly as she taped the page back together. Piece by piece. Harp. Tesla, $750. The same morning. The same car. It wasn't random. It was a hit. She tucked the evidence under her cleaning rag and kept moving as footsteps echoed behind her. "Hey! Sunshine!" one officer called out, smirking at her nickname. "You missed a spot." She forced a smile and rolled the mop away, heartbeat pounding like a drum. Upstairs. Elijah sat behind glass in the holding room. His wrists ached from the cuffs, but his mind was clear. He replayed every detail, their voices, the timestamps, the radio code. He knew how evidence vanished here. He'd seen cases collapse under malfunctions. This was no accident. They wanted him humiliated, discredited. It was all part of the game. He leaned forward, whispering to himself. 42 seconds. That's all I'll need. Detective Marcus Delgado entered the observation booth across the hall. He had been friends with McAllister once, before gambling debts and power ruined him. Delgado had seen too much, said too little. But something about this case felt wrong. He'd read the name Elijah Harper and felt a chill. He logged into the precinct server, navigating to the body cam archive. The file from the morning stop was flagged, corrupted. He checked the network log. Deletion request made from an internal IP. Time-stamped exactly 20 minutes after the arrest. The address matched McAllister's workstation. Delgado copied the original cache to a personal drive before it could vanish. He didn't know it yet, but that act would save a man's life. Meanwhile, Sonny slipped into the employee lounge. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. She pulled out her camera, loaded a new roll of 35mm film, and started photographing everything. Each page, each receipt, each scrap of handwriting. She had learned old-school methods from her sister, Selena, who vanished 2 years earlier while investigating the Tacoma port case. That disappearance still haunted Sonny's dreams. Every flash of the camera now felt like an act of defiance, a promise whispered to her lost sister. "I'll find them. I'll finish what you started. Back in the cell." Elijah noticed a faint hum from the vent above. Someone was walking down the hallway. Soft steps, lighter than boots. A knock came at the door. "Lunch," a voice said, female, cautious. The slot opened, and a brown paper bag slid through. Inside the bag was an apple, a sandwich, and a small folded note. He unfolded it under the table. They planned it before you left home. No signature. But the handwriting was careful. Familiar. He didn't know who S was, but he knew one thing. Someone out there was watching, and she knew the truth. Sunny finished her shift, turned in her badge, and stepped into the daylight outside the precinct. The sun reflected off her sunglasses as she walked down Jackson Street. Blending into the crowd, she stopped at a mailbox near Union Station, dropped a thick brown envelope inside, and whispered, "Run fast." Inside were the 12 photos, the invoice, and the blue bet note, addressed to an anonymous P.O. box registered to E. Harper. Hours later, Elijah's name hit the local booking log. Within minutes, the whispers started. A federal prosecutor under arrest? Assaulting an officer? The courthouse buzzed with disbelief. Naomi called her supervisor, who confirmed there was no warrant, no probable cause. She demanded entry again and was met with silence. The wall was tightening. Delgado returned to his desk, head spinning. He had printed the cash log and slipped it under his vest. McAllister was leaning against the vending machine nearby. Laughing with Voss. "Easy morning, huh?" Ryan said, tossing a coin. "Man got mouthy. We shut it." Lena didn't laugh. Her face was pale, her voice distant. He wasn't fighting. "Ryan, you know that?" McAllister's grin faded. "We play the game. We stick to the rules. Don't start feeling sorry now." He walked off, leaving her staring at her reflection in the vending glass. She saw herself not as a cop, but as a mother who might one day have to explain this to her son. That night, as the precinct quieted, Sunny sat in her one-room apartment surrounded by negatives and tape. The walls were covered with pinned photos, maps, receipts, timestamps, all linked by red thread. At the center sat a single Polaroid of Selena, smiling beside a ship container marked Tacoma 8871. Sunny whispered to it, "Your story isn't over yet." She began piecing together the notebook she had salvaged. Page by page, she recreated the Blue Bet ledger. The total stunned her. Over $1.2 million in wagers across 47 officers, spanning 5 years, every entry tied to a victim's name, race, and time of stop. This wasn't just corruption, it was a sport. As the clock hit midnight, Delgado opened his laptop at home, transferring the footage to an encrypted drive. The video showed everything: the stop, the false command, the pressure on Elijah's neck, the timer on the screen. 42 seconds. He stared at it, jaw tight. He'd seen plenty of bad arrests, but this one carried a different weight. He shut the lid, reached for his phone, and typed one message: "We need to talk. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Delgado." At 6:45 the next morning, the envelope from Sunny arrived at a federal P.O. box in downtown Seattle. A clerk noticed the sender field was blank but stamped it. Received without question. Inside the cell at Precinct 7, Elijah opened his eyes to another shaft of sunlight slicing through the bars. The bruises on his neck darkened overnight, but his resolve was solid. He knew someone had just handed him the first crack in the system's armor. He leaned forward, whispering to himself, "You made a bet. McAllister. But I've spent my life prosecuting gamblers." Outside, the city kept moving. Coffee shops opening, buses rumbling, sunlight glinting off glass towers. No one knew yet that inside an old steel bin labeled "Confidential Burn," the evidence that would bring down Seattle's most corrupt precinct had already been rescued by a woman named Sunny, who refused to let the truth die in the dark. The courthouse clock struck 9 as sunlight poured through the tall windows of courtroom 3B. The air was still, heavy with whispers. Every seat was taken: reporters, clerks, off-duty officers, even a few curious citizens who had read the morning headline, "Federal Prosecutor Arrested for Assaulting Police." No one knew yet that this was the beginning of Seattle's reckoning. Elijah Harper sat at the defense table, wrists stiff from yesterday's cuffs, suit wrinkled but posture straight. Across the aisle sat Sergeant Ryan McAllister, smug behind his uniform, his lawyer whispering in his ear. Officer Lena Voss sat one chair behind him, jaw clenched, eyes darting anywhere but toward Elijah. The judge entered. Evelyn Roth, 62, gray hair tied neatly, glasses perched on her nose. She had seen hundreds of cases, but this one felt different before it even began. Case number 2025-4721. The clerk read, State of Washington versus Elijah Harper. The murmurs grew louder, then faded as the gavel struck once. Judge Roth's tone was firm. Proceed. The prosecutor stood, his voice flat and practiced. Your Honor, the state charges Mr. Harper with resisting arrest and assaulting a police officer. Class C felony. He gestured toward McAllister, who played his role well, hands folded, head slightly bowed, pretending to be the victim. Our officers were responding to a traffic violation. The defendant became aggressive, attempted to flee, and struck Sergeant McAllister in the course of lawful duty. Elijah watched quietly. He had been in this position countless times, on the other side of the aisle, building cases, presenting evidence, demanding truth. Now the system he once defended was speaking against him with the same rehearsed authority he had used for years. He looked at the jury box. Ordinary citizens shifting uncomfortably, sensing something was off. His public defender, Connor Blake, rose nervously. He was 33, tired eyes, worn suit, a man drowning in debt and paperwork. This was not the client he had expected. A federal prosecutor with a spotless record and no prior incidents. Your Honor, Connor began, clearing his throat. My client maintains his innocence. There is no body cam footage confirming the officer's claim. The prosecutor cut in smoothly. That's because the body cam malfunctioned. Connor frowned. Both officers' cameras malfunctioned. At the same time? The room stirred. Judge Roth's eyes flicked upward. Do you have maintenance reports, Counselor? The prosecutor hesitated. Pending submission. Connor turned toward Elijah. Mr. Harper, did you resist arrest? No, Elijah said clearly. Voice steady, calm. I asked a question. They answered with violence. McAllister couldn't help himself. That's a lie, he shouted. The judge slammed her gavel. Sergeant, you'll remain silent unless spoken to. The courtroom quieted, but the tension hung thick like smoke. Connor tried to press on, flipping through his folder. His phone vibrated, an unknown number. He glanced down discreetly. A text. Remember who pays your daughter's tuition. Watch your tone. His hand trembled slightly as he locked the screen. Elijah caught it, his eyes narrowing. The system wasn't just corrupt, it was armed. The prosecution called its first witness, Lena Voss. She approached the stand slowly, right hand raised for the oath. Her voice wavered. I was assisting Sergeant McAllister on a routine stop. The suspect became non-compliant when asked to exit the vehicle. Connor stood. Objection. Your Honor, the term suspect implies guilt before the act. Mr. Harper was not wanted for any crime. Sustained, Judge Roth said softly, watching Voss over the rim of her glasses. Officer, please rephrase. Voss swallowed hard. The driver refused to open his trunk. We perceived a threat. Was he armed? No. Did he raise his voice? Make physical contact or attempt to flee? No. Then what threat did you perceive? Her silence said enough. McAllister shifted in his seat, glaring at her. Answer the question. Officer, Connor said, voice firming. I don't know, she whispered. Elijah studied her face. Tension, guilt, exhaustion. Somewhere under that uniform, a conscience was cracking. The prosecutor quickly ended her testimony. No further questions. Judge Roth took notes, her pen pausing occasionally, her brow tightening. She'd been on the bench long enough to recognize when testimony bent around truth. Connor called no witnesses that morning. He knew the game. They'd deny bail, drag it out, break him slowly, as they recessed for lunch. The judge looked down at Elijah. "Mr. Harper, I will review your release petition this afternoon." Her tone was neutral, but her eyes carried something. Maybe doubt, maybe sympathy. As the courtroom emptied, McAllister passed by the defense table. He leaned in close, just low enough so the deputies couldn't hear. "You think that badge makes you untouchable? We own this city. Harper, welcome to the other side." Elijah didn't flinch. "You should have done your homework," he murmured. "You just arrested the man who audits your payroll." McAllister's smirk faltered. For the first time, he saw something in Elijah's eyes that wasn't fear. It was calculation. In the back row, Sarah Sonny Bennett adjusted her vintage camera. She had slipped into the courtroom unnoticed, hair tied back, press pass clipped to her collar. Every flash captured emotion. The cold precision of the prosecutor, the panic on Voss's face, the self-satisfaction dripping from McAllister's grin. But the shot she cared about most was Elijah. The way he sat upright even in disgrace. The quiet fire in his eyes. She clicked one last frame just as the gavel struck for recess. The light hit him perfectly, half in sun, half in shadow. After lunch, the courtroom filled again. The prosecution moved to deny bail. "Your Honor," the prosecutor said, "Mr. Harper's position grants him access to federal resources that could compromise ongoing investigations. He's a flight risk." Connor stood, visibly angry. "That's absurd. He's the highest-ranking officer of the law in this district. If he wanted to flee, he wouldn't be sitting here in cuffs." Judge Roth tapped her pen. "Has the prosecution provided any evidence of intent to flee?" "Not at this time, Your Honor." She paused, exhaled, then said quietly, "Bail denied." The gavel fell like a verdict. The sound echoed off marble and glass. For a moment, no one moved. Elijah closed his eyes briefly, not in defeat, but in patience. He had expected this. Sometimes the only way to expose rot was from inside the walls. As officers led him away, his gaze brushed past Voss. She froze, for a heartbeat. She almost said something, but the weight of her silence won again. Outside, Sonny waited on the courthouse steps, camera in hand. When Elijah was escorted through the doors, she lifted the lens. The shutter clicked. The photo captured it all. The bruises on his neck, the sunlight behind his head like a halo, and the shame on the officers' faces as they realized who they had chained. That image would soon hit every newsroom in the state. Inside the courtroom, Judge Roth sat alone for a moment after clearing the docket. She removed her glasses, rubbed her temples, and whispered to herself, "What have we done?" By late afternoon, Naomi Park received a call from an unknown number. A woman's voice said softly, "He's not alone. Tell him to hold on. The truth is burning in the trash downstairs." Then the line went dead. That night, the local news aired the photo from Sonny's camera under the headline, "Federal prosecutor detained without cause." The public began to stir. Talk shows debated, commentators speculated, but inside his cell, Elijah didn't watch. He sat calmly under the thin light, waiting, somewhere, in a dark room across town. A roll of film was drying, the proof of a $1.2 million gambling ring that had just bet against the wrong man. The next morning, Seattle was bright and restless. The photo of Elijah Harper in handcuffs was everywhere, on phones, morning papers, and every television in the city. A man who once stood for justice now sat behind bars, his neck bruised, his dignity weaponized. Across town, in a small Capitol Hill apartment, Sarah Sunny Bennett sat on the floor surrounded by fragments of burnt paper she had rescued from the steel bin labeled Confidential Burn in the basement of Precinct 7. The smell of ash still clung to the pages. She took a deep breath and began to piece them together with strips of clear tape, her fingers trembling slightly, slowly. The words began to reappear in faded blue ink. Blue bet, 47 officers, $1.2 million total. Underneath, she saw a list, dates, vehicle types, race, and payout amounts. Then one line made her freeze. Harp, Tesla, 7 a.m., $750. Her stomach turned. It wasn't random. It was planned. Elijah Harper wasn't a coincidence. He was a name on a scorecard. Sunny leaned closer, tracing the handwriting with her thumb. The scrawled initials at the bottom, R. McAllister, were unmistakable. She'd seen them before, years ago, when her foster sister Selena had been investigating police misconduct in Tacoma before vanishing without a trace. Sunny's throat tightened. Everything connected. The same precinct. The same culture of betting. The same silence. She stood, surrounded by her evidence, dozens of torn notebook pages, film rolls, and Polaroids of officers drinking and passing envelopes of cash. She pinned each photo to the wall with tape until her living room looked like a crime map. In the center, she wrote 2 words in marker, the game, then. Below it, 47 players, 1 city betrayed. At Precinct 7, Sergeant Ryan McAllister slammed his locker shut, his rage echoing through the corridor. "Who leaked that damn picture?" he shouted. The younger officers fell silent. Lena Voss sat at her desk, head bowed, pretending to fill out a report. He stalked toward her. "You froze on the stand yesterday," he hissed. "You think I didn't see it?" She didn't respond. "Don't start thinking you're better than the rest of us," he snapped. "You signed up for this." Voss finally looked up, her eyes hollow. "You made me hold a man down while you laughed," she whispered. "That wasn't what I signed up for." McAllister's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. He turned and stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the glass. Upstairs, Detective Marcus Delgado sat alone in the Internal Affairs office, staring at a corrupted video file. It was labeled Cam 99 Stop Move and flagged as defective. He bypassed the deletion lock and found the hidden data log. There it was, Elijah Harper's traffic stop, for 30 seconds. The footage played normally, Harper calm, hands visible, voice steady. Then came the shout, "Stop resisting!" and the feed went black. Delgado checked the network activity and saw a deletion request sent from McAllister's terminal exactly 20 minutes after the arrest. He backed up the full cache and whispered, "Got you." Across town, Sunny changed into a beige courier uniform, pulling her cap low. She carried a small brown box labeled Legal Documents. Inside were the reconstructed pages of the Blue Bet Ledger, 12 printed photographs, and the Axon security invoice showing monthly cash payments to McAllister. She needed to get it into Elijah Harper's hands before the next hearing. The courthouse smelled faintly of disinfectant and old coffee. Sunlight streamed through the glass atrium as she walked toward the elevators, her pulse steady but fast. Halfway down the hall, she froze. McAllister was standing near the vending machine, talking on his phone. His eyes lifted and locked onto hers. Recognition flashed in an instant. "Hey!" he barked. "You! Stop right there!" Sunny turned and ran. The box thudded against her chest as she bolted down the corridor. McAllister shouted for backup, his boots pounding behind her. She pushed through a side door, sprinting down the stairwell. The papers spilled, fluttering like confetti through the air. She grabbed what she could, photos, receipts, one key page of the ledger, and shoved them inside her jacket. She reached the parking level and ducked behind a maintenance cart. McAllister burst through the door seconds later, furious, panting. "You think you're clever, huh?" he sneered, advancing. Sunny backed up slowly, then spoke, voice low but firm. "Clever enough to make sure you're in every frame." He lunged forward. Sonny shoved the cart hard into his leg and darted past him. He stumbled, cursing. As she sprinted toward the exit, a security guard appeared near the ramp. "Sergeant, what's going on?" McAllister straightened instantly. "Nothing. Routine." But his face was red, his composure cracking. Outside, sunlight hit Sonny's face like salvation. She ducked behind a row of cars, breathing hard, then reached inside her jacket. Her fingers closed around the roll of 35mm film she had hidden in her inner pocket. The rest of the box might be gone. But this roll held everything. McAllister taking cash from an Axon employee at a bar called the Blue Horse. That single image could burn him to the ground. That night, inside his cell. Elijah sat quietly when the door opened. Connor Blake entered, looking exhausted but alert. His hands trembled slightly as he placed a manila envelope on the table. "This came for you," he said. Elijah opened it carefully. Inside were photographs, receipts, and a folded note in neat handwriting. "They planned it before you left home." Elijah looked up, meeting Connor's eyes. "You believe me now?" Connor nodded. "I do, and I think we can prove it." He slid another photo forward. McAllister shaking hands with a man outside Axon security, a white envelope visible between them. "Who sent you this?" Elijah asked. "A woman named Sonny Bennett," Connor replied. "She said to tell you she's not stopping until every one of them falls." Elijah leaned back, exhaling slowly. "Then tomorrow," he said, "we bring the sun inside the courtroom, across town." Sonny stood in her dark room, watching the photos emerge under the red glow. The faces appeared one by one. McAllister at a poker table, Ortiz, the police chief, in the background of a precinct fundraiser, and one shot that made Sonny's blood run cold. Ortiz and McAllister together at a shipping yard, standing beside a marked container, the same place Selena had visited before she disappeared. Sonny stared at it for a long time, then placed it on the drying line with trembling hands. By midnight, she sealed a second envelope with the developed photos and dropped it into the federal courthouse's overnight mailbox. Outside, the night was warm, the air heavy but dry. She looked up at the skyline, the city lights reflected off the water, bright and indifferent. "You're not gone." "Selena," she whispered. "You left me the trail, back at the precinct." McAllister sat in his office, staring at a blank computer screen. Delgado's encrypted message blinked unread in his inbox. Outside, the sound of police radios echoed faintly. For the first time, McAllister felt something he hadn't felt in years. Fear. And miles away, in a cell barely large enough to stretch his legs, Elijah Harper closed his eyes. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Only that sunlight was coming again. And this time, it would shine on the truth. Morning light poured through the high windows of courtroom 3B, glinting off the polished wood and the rows of silent faces waiting for the hearing to begin. Outside, cameras lined the courthouse steps. Reporters shouted questions about Blue Bet, a phrase now sweeping through the city like a storm. Inside, Elijah Harper sat at the defense table in a black suit, his posture calm but unyielding. His throat still bore the faint marks of restraint, yet his eyes were clear, focused, ready. Connor Blake sat beside him, shuffling notes, his hands steady for the first time since the arrest. The air was charged, almost electric. When the bailiff called the room to order, even the sound of footsteps seemed to echo with anticipation. Judge Evelyn Roth entered, robe flowing, expression unreadable. She struck the gavel once. Court is now in session. Her tone was firm, deliberate. The prosecutor rose immediately. "Your Honor, the state intends to prove that the defendant resisted arrest, endangered officers, and attempted to conceal evidence." Elijah's gaze remained fixed on the judge. Then, with quiet precision, He stood. "Your Honor," he said, "before we proceed, I request permission to address the court directly." The prosecutor objected. "He's the defendant, not counsel." Judge Roth hesitated, then nodded. "Proceed, Mr. Harper, but keep it brief." Elijah reached into his suit pocket and withdrew something that caught the light. A gold badge, gleaming under the morning sun streaming through the tall glass windows. The courtroom gasped. He held it up calmly. "This," he said, voice steady, "is the federal prosecutor's badge for the Western District of Washington. I earned it 15 years ago, under oath, to uphold justice without fear or favor. Yesterday, the men who assaulted me wore badges of their own." But a badge, he paused, glancing toward McAllister, means nothing when it no longer represents the truth. The prosecutor sputtered. "Your Honor, this is theatrics." But Elijah continued, voice rising just enough to fill the room. "These officers bet on arrests. They gambled on humiliation. They turned justice into a game called Blue Bet, and I can prove it." The room fell silent. Judge Roth leaned forward slightly. "You have evidence. Mr. Harper?" Connor stood. "Yes, Your Honor. 47 pages of ledger entries recovered from Precinct 7, all verified by timestamp and officer signature." He lifted a folder and handed it to the clerk. Roth opened it slowly, her eyes scanning the handwritten columns, names, payouts, racial slurs scribbled in margins, and a single entry dated the morning of the arrest. Harp, Tesla, $750. Her pen froze mid-air. The prosecutor stood again, trying to regain control. "Objection! These documents are unverified." Connor interrupted sharply. "They've been authenticated by Detective Marcus Delgado, Internal Affairs. He's here to testify." A murmur rippled through the gallery as Delgado entered the courtroom, holding a drive in his hand. "Your Honor," he said, "this contains the unedited body cam footage from the arrest. It was deleted from the precinct system by Sergeant McAllister's terminal 20 minutes after the incident. He inserted the drive into the court's evidence display." The lights dimmed slightly as the screen flickered on. For 30 seconds. The jury saw Elijah standing beside his Tesla, hands visible, voice calm. Then McAllister's shout filled the room. "Stop resisting!" followed by the thud of impact. The image froze on McAllister's knee, pressing Elijah's neck. A timestamp blinked in the corner, 7:03:17 a.m. Gasps broke out. Someone in the back whispered, 42 seconds. Judge Roth's hand trembled slightly as she removed her glasses. "Play the rest." The footage continued. Voss's voice, shaky, pleading, "Ryan, stop. You're hurting him." Then static. The screen went black when the lights came back on. Silence flooded the courtroom. McAllister sat stiff, face pale, sweat beading at his temple. Voss avoided his eyes, staring down at her folded hands. Elijah spoke quietly. "Your Honor, the footage is only part of it. The officers profited from these encounters. They used a private contractor, Axon Security. As a laundering front, Connor displayed a photograph, McAllister accepting an envelope from a man in an Axon uniform. Another photo followed, Chief Pamela Ortiz shaking McAllister's hand at a precinct fundraiser. The same company that supplied their body cams, Elijah added, paid them to turn those cameras off. The gallery erupted in murmurs. The judge struck her gavel. "Order! Order!" Connor turned to the witness stand. "Detective Delgado, who authorized the deletions?" Delgado hesitated. "I can confirm only that the order came from McAllister's system, but higher commands knew the pattern." He swallowed. This wasn't the first time. Connor nodded grimly. "We call our next witness, Officer Tyler Reed." Every head turned as Tyler entered from the back. Plainclothes, nervous but resolute. He had resigned 2 years earlier after reporting irregularities in traffic citations. He took the stand, hands gripping the edge. I recorded Sergeant McAllister in 2023 bragging about Blue Bet, he said, and I quote, "Black guy in a luxury car? Easy money." The courtroom gasped again. Connor pressed a button, and the recording played. McAllister's voice came through the speakers. Boastful. Mocking. "You cuff them. You cash in. That's the rule." McAllister leapt to his feet. "That's fake! Spliced audio!" Judge Roth pounded her gavel. "Sit down, Sergeant!" But the damage was done. Even the prosecutor had gone pale. Elijah turned to the bench. "Your Honor, this isn't just about me. It's about every name in that ledger. 312 victims. Every one of them deserves to be heard." The judge looked at him for a long moment. "Mr. Harper, you're asking this court to accept evidence that implicates not only these officers but their command." Elijah nodded slowly. "Yes, Your Honor, because the truth doesn't stop at rank." The courtroom doors opened suddenly. 2 federal agents entered, flashing identification. "Your Honor," one said, "we have a federal order to seize all records related to the Blue Bet investigation, under the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division." Roth nodded gravely. "Execute your warrant." As the agents collected files and drives, McAllister muttered under his breath, "This is a setup." He turned to Voss, whispering frantically, "Say something. Tell them." But Voss didn't move. Tears welled in her eyes. Finally, she stood. "Your Honor," she said softly, "it's true. Every word. We took bets. We turned people into numbers." The room fell silent again. McAllister stared at her in disbelief. "You're finished," he hissed. She looked at him calmly. "So are you." Judge Roth leaned back, her voice solemn. "The court will recess pending federal review. All defendants are remanded to federal custody." The gavel struck hard, echoing through the hall like a final judgment, as agents escorted McAllister away. He shouted over his shoulder, "You think this ends with me? Harper, you have no idea who's behind it." Elijah watched him go, unflinching. "Then I guess we'll find out," he said quietly. Outside. Sunlight flooded the courthouse steps as the doors opened. Reporters surged forward, microphones raised. Elijah emerged slowly, the golden badge pinned to his chest catching the morning light. He didn't speak to the cameras. He simply looked out at the crowd, citizens, victims, strangers, and nodded once. The truth had begun to move. Behind him. Sonny Bennett watched from across the street, camera in hand. She lowered it after taking one final photo, Elijah in sunlight. Badge shining, surrounded by chaos and clarity all at once, she whispered. "You did it." But Elijah's mind was already elsewhere. The case was only half over, somewhere beyond the courthouse. Shadows were shifting, and one name kept echoing in his thoughts. Selena. Her disappearance was no longer just a tragedy. It was connected, and as the sunlight glimmered across his badge, Elijah Harper knew one thing with absolute certainty. The next battle had already begun, 30 days after the trial. The city of Seattle no longer looked the same. Precinct 7, once known for its efficiency and discipline, stood abandoned, its signboard removed, the windows boarded up. The Blue Bet scandal had detonated through every level of law enforcement like a fault line finally snapping. Sergeant Ryan McAllister's name was now a national synonym for corruption, his face plastered across every news station. He had tried to disappear, faking a suicide on a fishing boat off Vancouver Island. But Canadian Border Patrol found him alive 3 days later in a rented cabin under a false name. He was extradited back to the U.S., handcuffed in the same way he had humiliated others. His sentencing was swift. 25 years in federal prison for racketeering, assault under color of authority, and obstruction of justice, when the verdict was read. He didn't look at Elijah Harper. He just muttered. "It was never supposed to get this far," Elijah had quietly replied. "It always gets this far when you gamble with human lives." Officer Lena Voss's story was quieter, sadder. After confessing on the stand, She was dismissed from the force. The Department of Justice spared her prison time in exchange for cooperation, but she lost custody of her son. At her hearing, she told the judge, "I wish I'd spoken sooner. Every silence was another bruise on someone else's skin." She was sent to a rehabilitation program for trauma and steroid withdrawal, a broken soul trying to start again. Chief Pamela Ortiz, who had spent her career marketing herself as the reformer Seattle needed, fell the hardest. The DOJ traced $2.1 million from Axon Security into a personal foundation she managed through offshore accounts. Within a week of the federal indictments, her retirement package was revoked, and her house was seized. She disappeared from the public eye entirely, reportedly living in Idaho under another name. To the press, her lawyer simply said, "She's done talking." Marcus Delgado, the detective who risked his job by preserving the deleted footage, was promoted to lead the Internal Affairs Bureau. He refused interviews, saying only one sentence when a reporter caught him outside his office. Justice doesn't need a microphone. His files helped reopen 23 prior cases that had been quietly closed under procedural compliance. One by one, those old ghosts began to breathe again. Connor Blake, the overworked public defender who had nearly given in to fear, found redemption in the aftermath. After the case closed, he resigned from the county office and opened a small nonprofit law firm in Belltown offering free defense services for victims of police misconduct. On the first day, he hung a photo of Elijah Harper on the wall beside the quote, "Truth is a debt that must always be paid." The most visible change came from the victims. The city approved an 18.7 million compensation fund for 312 people falsely arrested, beaten, or extorted under the Blue Bet system. For many, the money wasn't enough. It could never be. But the recognition mattered. The first check went to a young black father whose arrest had triggered the earliest bets in 2021. Standing outside City Hall, he told reporters, "They thought they could make a game out of us. Now we're writing the rules." Elijah Harper, though, was no longer in office to see it happen. He had resigned quietly a week after the verdict, leaving behind his corner office at the federal prosecutor's office when a journalist asked him why. He answered simply, "Justice shouldn't belong to one office. It belongs to everyone willing to fight for it." With Sarah Sonny Bennett and Marcus Delgado, he co-founded the Harper Justice Institute, an independent legal center dedicated to exposing misconduct and funding reform programs across the state. The Institute's first project was a civilian audit board for police accountability. Within a month, 5 major cities requested to replicate the model. For Sonny, the weeks after the trial were both triumph and grief. The investigation had made her famous overnight. But fame meant little. Every time she looked at her sister's photo, she knew the story wasn't over. The last frame from her recovered film, showing Chief Ortiz and McAllister at the Tacoma shipping yard, still haunted her. The file was turned over to the FBI, but Elijah had his doubts. Too many threads led back to federal names, and one of them might explain why Selena had vanished in the first place on the 30th day. Elijah stood on the steps of the now-empty courthouse. The morning sun was soft, golden, the same light that had once blinded him on Highway 99. Behind him, volunteers were painting over graffiti on the walls. "No badge above the law." He turned as Sonny approached, holding a manila folder. "Last file from the DOJ audit," she said, handing it to him. "They think it's closed." He opened it and stared at the document inside. An old internal memo from Axon Security dated 2 years before the Blue Bet scandal began. At the bottom was a familiar signature. Nolan Gray. Elijah read quietly. "Deputy Director, FBI Liaison." He looked up at her. Selena's case was never random. Sonny nodded. "I know. I found the last photo she took. Ortiz wasn't the only one there. The two stood there for a long time, sunlight warming the courthouse steps. Around them, the city kept moving. Buses, chatter, construction sounds, ordinary life returning after extraordinary pain. But beneath the calm, both knew Seattle hadn't healed. It had only awakened. Elijah finally spoke, voice low but firm. "This isn't the end. It's the beginning of something bigger." Sonny smiled faintly. "Then let's begin again." He looked down at his hands, the faint scars still visible, the memory of 42 seconds that had nearly defined him. He thought of McAllister in prison, of Ortiz hiding, of the officers who would never wear their badges again. He thought of Selena, standing somewhere near Tacoma years ago, camera in hand, whispering into the wind, "Light always finds the truth." As he turned toward the street, the sun climbed higher, bright and unyielding. Seattle was still scarred, but the darkness had been named. And that, Elijah knew, was where real justice always begins. The city was quiet that afternoon. A thin veil of heat shimmered over the harbor, and the sound of gulls carried across Tacoma's docks. Elijah Harper stood near the edge of the pier, the sun striking the back of his suit jacket as if demanding he face the light. Beside him, Sarah Sonny Bennett held a small wooden box she had found in his apartment 2 nights earlier, carved with the words, "For Sonny, if I'm gone." She'd brought it without a word, knowing it wasn't hers to open. Elijah's hands were still, almost reverent. As he lifted the lid, inside lay 9 Polaroid photos, neatly stacked, their edges frayed by time. The first few showed the same container yard where Selena had vanished 2 years earlier, numbers painted on rusted steel, 8871. In the background of one photo, sunlight glinted off a badge, an FBI badge, half visible on the jacket of a man whose face was turned away. Sonny watched quietly as Elijah spread the photos across the hood of his car. These were hers. He said softly, "Selena sent them to me before she disappeared. I thought they were just from her last assignment, but she was trying to tell me something." He picked up the final photo, McAllister, Ortiz, and that same man in the suit, all standing beside the container marked 8871. She found them. She must have known what was inside. Sonny nodded. She was following the money trail, not realizing it led straight into federal hands. The wind picked up, flipping one of the Polaroids over, on the back. Selena's handwriting read, "Don't trust Ortiz. They're not who they say they are." For a long moment, neither spoke. The sound of the waves filled the silence. The same rhythm Selena used to say reminded her of time, how it erased everything eventually, except truth. Elijah looked out at the water, his reflection glimmering over the waves. She always said light was a witness. He murmured, "Even when people look away." He took a deep breath, his voice lowering. "Now it's my turn to finish what she started." Sonny handed him a small envelope. "I developed the last roll of film she left in the camera. Inside were 4 new photos, grainy but unmistakable. The first showed a dock worker loading boxes with Axon security logos. The second, a man in a dark suit bearing a lanyard that read Federal Liaison, Gray." Elijah froze. "Nolan Gray," he whispered, "the same name from the Axon memo." Sonny nodded. "He's not gone. He's in D.C. now, working under the Bureau's Special Oversight Branch." She hesitated before adding, "The DOJ closed the case this morning. Officially, Selena's death is listed as unresolved." Elijah's jaw tightened. Unresolved means buried. He looked up toward the sun, squinting slightly. "Then we'll dig." They stood there for a while, letting the heat settle around them. The port hummed with the dull machinery of commerce, trucks reversing, cranes moving, people unaware that beneath those ordinary motions lay an empire of secrets. Sunny reached into her bag and pulled out one more item, a sealed roll of undeveloped film. This was hidden inside the box. She said, "I didn't want to open it without you." Elijah took it carefully, weighing it in his palm like evidence from a crime that refused to die. "Do you want to know what's on it?" she asked. He shook his head slowly. "Not yet. Some truth needs a witness." He stepped toward a steel barrel set near the dock, filled with ash and old papers. From his coat pocket, he drew the same lighter he'd carried since his Marine days. He struck the flint once. The flame caught instantly, a thin, trembling line of orange. Sunny's eyes widened. "You're burning it?" Elijah looked at her calmly. Selena risked everything to expose this, but she also knew some things shouldn't survive in the wrong hands. This film could destroy lives, people who still need to come forward. "We'll find them another way." He tossed the roll into the fire. The plastic cracked, the flame flared, and a thin column of smoke rose into the bright sky. For a moment, neither moved. The smoke curled upward, a dark thread unraveling into sunlight. Elijah watched it fade, then whispered. That's how she said goodbye. Quiet, without applause. Sunny turned to him, eyes wet but steady. "And what about you?" she asked. "What do you say goodbye to?" He smiled faintly. To silence. They left the dock together, walking toward the end of the pier where the sea breeze carried the scent of salt and fuel. Near the car. Sunny stopped and looked back. "Do you ever wonder," she said softly, "what she'd think if she saw all this?" Elijah nodded. "She'd tell us the fight's not over." He looked at the horizon, bright, endless, almost too white to stare into, and she'd tell me to keep the Institute going. Later that evening, back at the Harper Justice Institute, sunlight poured through the large front windows as volunteers packed boxes of files. On the wall hung a framed photo of Selena, camera in hand, smiling. Below it, a plaque read, "Truth is the only light that doesn't fade." Elijah watched as a young intern carefully mounted a second frame beside it. One of the photos Sunny had taken at the courthouse. Elijah stepping out into daylight, the golden badge gleaming on his chest. He turned toward the open window, the smell of the sea still clinging to his clothes. The city stretched below, honest, raw, imperfect, but awake. The same streets that once humiliated him now carried protest banners, murals, and quiet determination. Sunny appeared in the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee. "The board wants to name a scholarship after her," she said. "For investigative journalists?" Elijah smiled. "Good. Let them call it the Selena Grant Fund, for those who chase truth, even when it burns." As the sun began to dip, its reflection gleamed off the courthouse dome in the distance. Elijah looked out one last time, his voice barely above a whisper. She wanted justice to be more than punishment. She wanted it to mean change. Sunny placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then we'll make sure it does." They stood together in the soft gold of late afternoon, the city alive below, the Institute buzzing behind them. The weight of everything that had been lost giving way to something fragile but real. For the first time in months, Elijah felt peace, not victory, not closure, but peace, far across the water. The last wisp of smoke from the burned film rose into the sunlit sky and disappeared, and as it vanished, so did the shadow that had followed him since that morning on Highway 99. Justice, at last, had found its light. Thank you for watching this story. If it moved you, share it with someone who still believes in justice. Subscribe to the channel. Leave a like. Every story shared keeps the truth alive.